So good afternoon and welcome to the BIA's Brexit briefing for this month, January 2018. My name's Steve Bates, I'm the CEO here, and Laura Collister, our Brexit lead, will also be chiming in as the other voice you hear. As you can see, we've now moved from taking our countdown clock from days, 434 days till Brexit, into hours, 10,424 hours for those of you who follow these things. So I hope what we can share with you in the next 20 minutes before we answer some questions are a quick update on the negotiations, some things that have gone on from a UK perspective. I think the regulation points and the things that the MHRA have put out this week are important, so I'd encourage you to pay particular attention at that point. What's going on from an EU perspective and what we're doing here at the BIA. As you know, this is a monthly series of webinars, and the previous December webinar, for those of you who are enjoying an early Christmas break, is available on our YouTube channel and covered these points. These are then put up on our YouTube channel if you have colleagues or friends who are fed up with the latest Netflix series and want a bit more Brexit, then they are available to view both in the work hours and at the weekends. So a little bit on the negotiations, and I hope you're enjoying our new BIA branding, new for 2018. This is the key timeline for the next couple of months, and most of this is about key European meetings. So I'll take you through the key dates. So at the end of the month, on January the 29th, there's a General Affairs Council of the European Union. We expect there to be a discussion of Article 50 negotiations, where they've got to, and that may be the point at which there is some more clarity about whether there is an implementation stroke transition period beyond the next 400 days. So is there some outline at the end of the month about direction of travel there? We hear rumours and see press speculation that the UK Prime Minister may give a speech in early February. The dates there are the recess of the House of Commons, and we've seen in previous times the Prime Minister Theresa May travel to an important European city on a milli break and give an important speech. We've seen a Florence speech. It would be unsurprising to see another intervention suggesting a direction of travel as part of the dance of Brexit. So perhaps we'd see a speech from the Prime Minister that may give direction to where we might be going. Towards the end of the month, we have the EU informal heads of government. They may discuss what's gone on at the General Affairs Council, and then there's another one of the General Affairs Councils at the end of February, and again in March, prior to Easter, there's a full European Council where if there is either a deal around about an increased transition time or how phase 2 of Brexit might be played out, it could happen. So that's sort of where we are Christmas to Easter. And you can see that the EU ambassador from Bulgaria, who hold the presidency at the moment, at the top, has this as a plan. The EU plans to issue directive on the transition plan by the end of January, in line with the General Affairs Council, and directives on the future relationship by March, in line with the European Council. So that's really our thinking. Matt remains our favourite cartoonist when it comes to how we think about Brexit. Now, for those of you who are close watchers of the Brexit negotiation process, I share with you this letter, which was from David Davis to the Prime Minister, leaked to the FT in the papers a couple of weeks ago. And I refer you here to the third paragraph on the left-hand side. What this is really about is a letter where David Davis, the Secretary of State for Exiting the European Union, complains that some of the moves by the EU 27 are giving advice to businesses as to how to operate on the basis that there's no deal. And what's interesting here, I think, is the sentence: some EU agencies have published guidance to business outlining that the UK will become a third company when we stop being a member state in March 2019, but with no reference to possible alternative arrangements that might be agreed as part of our implementation period or future relationship discussions. These say that compliance activity, such as the final quality control by a qualified person of each batch of a medicine before it is released onto the market, would need to be based in the EU or the EEA after exit. So they say, and it's essentially the Secretary of State for Exiting the EU suggesting his concerns that this isn't how things should be played, and I think it's been poo-pooed by the European Union, as this slide shows. The European Commission's chief spokesman expressed surprise at this letter, as it insisted it was only natural for the bloc to prepare for a situation threatened repeatedly by Downing Street. The reason I bothered to put this in is I think that it shows that those of you who followed these for a while, shows that our message has landed with DexEU. The importance of our sector and some of the detailed concerns that we've put are being reflected in internal UK government documents. There's nothing new in the letter. I mean, we expect this, it follows in line with European Medicines Agency guidance, but I think it's useful to see that, and it just gives you a sense of when we see what's under the bonnet in terms of the discussions within the UK government. Some of the things that we have been arguing for are central to that debate, which I think is useful. And I hope you're able to keep more awake through these slides than Brexiteer Desmond Swain, famously seen here asleep, although he said it was only a snooze for 30 seconds, whilst strong Remainer Ken Clarke was speaking in the House of Commons. So what's going on from a UK update? Just a bit of background if you don't follow UK politics and UK government all the time. There was a government reshuffle as we came back after the new year. There was a suggestion that there might be some moves and much fevered speculation in Westminster, but in the end, there wasn't any change in the Secretary of State's for Health, Business or Department of Exiting the EU, and a new minister was appointed in the Department for Exiting the EU and in BEIS. If you follow the Home Office, Brandon Lewis, who was the Immigration Minister, was replaced by Caroline Noakes, and Lewis was promoted from Immigration Minister to become Chairman of the Conservative Party. We were particularly taken by this tweet that Larry remains the cat in Downing Street. If you think of lots of change was expected, he could have got any of the top jobs. The Labour Party, we watched the Labour Party, the official opposition in the UK, quite closely because it's such a closely contested parliament, and we have seen snap elections called in the past, and who knows where we'll be this year. So I think what was interesting is we have former Prime Minister Tony Blair out arguing for saying he's trying to reverse Brexit and saying that there should be a second referendum, whilst the new leader, Jeremy Corbyn, has confirmed that Labour Party policy is not to be part of the single market. He passed up the chance to join a cross-party summit engaging on this. I think what's also important is we've seen some important internal elections within the Labour Party, which have strengthened Jeremy Corbyn's hand in giving him control over the discipline element of the party. And it may mean that MPs feel either free if they feel they're going to be deselected, or more closely tied to the policy. So we stay up on that, but probably not the crucial thing. I shall now hand over to Laura to talk about the EU Relations All-Party Parliamentary Group.
Thank you. So all-party parliamentary groups are cross-party groupings within Parliament that are interested in a specific subject. So obviously this group is interested in remaining within the EU. It's fronted by some of the core Remainers, including Chicory Mina from the Labour Party and Anna Soubry. Members of it also include Jacob Rees-Mogg and Dominic Grieve, who has tabled a number of amendments to the EU bill as that goes through Parliament. This week they've been busy. They've been off to see Barnier and in Brussels to talk about, from their point of view, their concerns around Brexit. What they've also been doing is meeting diplomats from across the EU 27 to get feedback. They've written, this week they've written up in detail the feedback they're hearing. It's the type of things that we've heard all along around concerns around a plan, the need to be single market, etc. There's no big surprises there, though it was generally what's been reported before. In terms of where everything is in Parliament, the EU withdrawal bill has now passed through the Commons, has passed its third reading in the House of Commons, and is now heading to the House of Lords, where it might have a really tough time. Obviously, there's been a few votes. If you've listened to the last few webinars in the House of Commons, expect even more, it's have even more of a contentious time in the House of Lords. One amendment of particular interest was around UK staying in the single market and customs union, which, even though it was massively defeated by 322 to 99 votes, the Labour Party had asked its MPs to abstain, yet 48 of them still voted for the amendment, including Chaka Amuna from the All Party Group and Daniel Zeichner, who is the MP for Cambridge. The other votes that came were from the SNP and the Lib Dems, and one Conservative, Ken Clarke, who we saw earlier on the David Davis slide. 3 Labour Brexiteers also interestingly voted with the government, so they were Frank Field, Kate Hoey and Graham Stringer. The 2 other key bills in our area going through Parliament are the Customs Bill and the Trade Bill. They're now both in the House of Commons committee stage and are looking for external submissions, and we will be putting some comments in there into that in the next few days. It's a very short deadline. It's just to inform the committee stage. It's not something they usually do, but we feel it's a good opportunity to engage in those areas. We've talked about the select committees quite a bit in the past as well. Exiting the EU has been doing an inquiry into the progress of UK's negotiations on EU withdrawal, and this week they went to Cambridge and took evidence from a number of organisations, including Cancer Research UK, as well as AstraZeneca. The Science and Technology Select Committee has announced that it's going to do a Brexit Science Innovation Summit, which will likely be end of February, start of March, and they are seeking comments to that, specifically asking for evidence that you haven't submitted to them already. So we are putting some evidence together, and we're going to do that jointly with the ABPI. The Health Committee and the BEIS Committee are continuing their inquiries into Brexit and our sector. The Health Select Committee have the ministers in next week, so Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt and our Minister Lord O'Shaughnessy, as well as Ian Hudson from the MHRA. The BEIS Committee, their inquiry continues. They've not had ministers yet, so we'd expect them to come in quite quickly. And in terms of the processes after that, we would expect them then to form a report which they will launch. So they'll probably expect that around February time.
So, Laura, thank you. I think with regard to Parliament and select committees, I think what we're seeing a stage where Parliament is gathering evidence, and we've been, through your great offices, making sure that we've made sure that the collective understanding of BIA members, together with the ABPI, has been inputted at the appropriate points, using tactical opportunities to intervene on bills where possible. I think the key thing in strategic terms is that Parliament is collecting its view together as to what it may do with regard to any deal that comes back from Brussels. And I think the big picture is where Parliament sits by about the autumn on whatever deal is done, and whether some of the public debate that is going on through Parliament is influencing the government's position ahead of that debate or ahead of that deal, if a deal is to be done. So I think these are parallel processes, the negotiation process and the, if you like, the scrutiny of it through the UK Parliament. And we're trying to make sure that our position is known clearly by both. And I think obviously much of this is mediated through the UK media, which will continue to monitor closely. So thank you for that.
Moving on to more government announcements. So the Home Office held a roundtable just before Christmas for the life sciences sector. This was in response to a specific ask from our sector for more engagement from them. The then minister, he's obviously just moved on, Brandon Lewis, chaired the roundtable, and they followed up with an official letter to the participants that we are able to share with members on request. So if you would like a copy of the letter, there's a few of the words here, which is sort of about giving reassurance to EU citizens that are working in organisations in our sector. But please contact me if you would like a copy. My email address is on this slide. This is a slide from last month. Just thought it was worth repeating it. These are the key announcements that government has already announced in terms of people and EU citizens in the UK. So just to highlight, they're looking for a new digital system. They're hoping to launch it late this year and it will be very similar to the passport renewal process, a quick, cost no more, and a speedy decision. Just moving on a bit here. So down the bottom is a picture of the new cabinet, but what also has been happening this week is the first meeting of the inner Brexit cabinet, which brings together the Brexit ministers. There hasn't been that much coming out of that meeting. It's all been very quiet. But one of the things there's been a lot of discussion around is regulatory divergence. So there has been quite a bit of press coverage around Boris Johnson, Liam Fox and Michael Gove, etc., seeking to sort of move away from regulatory divergence because they feel that there is opportunity from it. One article this week went into a bit more detail around businesses. So BIA has already inputted in some work CBI has been doing and on regulation and has reported into government, and they're following that up with another bit of work which we're inputting into at the moment. But what they were saying is that all industry sectors feel that frictionless trade is the most important thing and would accept regulatory alignment. So even those that might naturally not want regulatory alignment, unlike us, still would prefer it if it would provide frictionless trade. And that's sort of reflected as well by the Institute of Directors, who came out with something quite similar, saying their members would prefer to maintain regulatory alignment.
So thanks, Laura. I think what's interesting here is that the discussion that we were having probably 18 months ago, and certainly through most of last year, about the importance of regulation, access to the market, is becoming the core discussion, I think, in the cabinet about where they're going to go to. I don't think we're seeing very much as to where they are going, but I think you can see that our life science voice is in line with much of the other sectors of UK business and international business about the value of continued frictionless trade, regulatory alignment. So hopefully we have the strength of the business voice, and we'll see where that gets to in what is, of course, a political discussion. So we're keeping an eye on that and seeing where it's going. Now, I said that one of the highlights of this webinar would be us touching on regulation, and here it is. So this week we have seen the MHRA on their website publish a new document on the UK regulatory requirements after March 2019 in the event of no ongoing relationship with the EMA networks, the current relationship with the EU and UK European networks, and some comments on the goods on the market. So if you think about this in big picture terms, we've seen guidance from the European Medicines Agency for many months now, last year for pharmaceutical companies about what to do with Brexit approaching. For the first time this week, we've seen a statement on their approach from the MHRA. And perhaps you'll have seen, if you're on various of our lists, you probably are, if you're on this webinar, our perspective on this. So we welcome the fact that there's more public clarity. We think it's useful that there's a pragmatic approach to establishing what the UK might do in a no-deal scenario. I'm interested to see that the statement references to ensuring the continuity and the availability of the goods on the market in relation to medicines for the first time. Remember, the statement on goods on the market was specific in the deal that was done, or the series of announcements by the EU and the UK in December. I think this document for the first time puts that statement in the context of medicines, and gives me comfort that we interpreted the intent of that declaration correctly last month. That essentially, if you have goods on the market, i.e., finished product in market, then that will be able to continue to be distributed and sold, even with a no-deal cliff edge Brexit. And I've seen also a press comment on this in some of the trades. There's some quite strong words from the MHRA about their commitment to continue to engage fully with the European network and bid for EMA work right up to the moment of Brexit, which I think is, in some respects, a bit of a pushback to some of the messaging we've seen from the EMA network and around that sort of they need to ease the Brits out at this point. So interesting that you've got the Brits making the case that they fully intend to play their part up to any potential Brexit indifference to, if you like, a managed disengagement, which is in a sense the flavour you get from the European Medicines Agency. So interesting stuff, and well worth a look. An important document to put alongside the EMA document. No doubt at the end you'll have lots of questions for me about the detail of this. What I'd say is that we are engaged with the EMA, and through our European associations and with the MHRA. I'm not sure I'll be able to answer many of your questions, but I think I'll have a crack at interpretation, but it'll only be my interpretation, not government policy or MHRA position. A little bit from the EU 27. So it's interesting in terms of the, we always like Twitter, and this one's from Tusk, not from Trump, the EU president. Our hearts are still open to you. So you could change, you could change it all. Was the message that was floating across, and I think it's interesting to see that if you like, you have Tony Blair on one side of the channel saying the Brits have the right to change their mind and there could be a second referendum, and you've got Donald Tusk saying our hearts are still open to you. So is there a chance of things being turned around? Who knows? But I think it's interesting to see that as the messaging that's going out, and the European Council President live and well on Twitter there. This week we've seen an important summit down at the UK Military Academy of Sandhurst with nothing less than a treaty signed between the UK and France. President Macron here with a new deal for on security of Calais, UK taking more refugees. Not so much direct in coming out about what this means for Brexit, but I think it's interesting that these important meetings are taking place, and I'm sure that there will be some of this leading up to the bigger timetable I saw at the beginning of the week. In parenthesis, I thought it was interesting to see that we may have our struggles in the UK, but they are mirrored, I think, sometimes by the French industry. I've seen Patrick Harard, the head of the French pharma lobby group, very concerned today about the number of clinical trials for new drugs in France dropping by a quarter, and very few of them being able to be placed on the market. And in fact, that the health assessment body, the French equivalent of NICE, haven't given any improvement in actual benefit markings to any medicines in 2016 or 2017. So perhaps we have more in common and some other things to share with our colleagues in France, as well as the BIA tapestry. Germany, it looks like that there's an important weekend ahead as to whether there is going to be a new coalition in Germany several months after the German elections. I think that we can see that there's a discussion, and actually the health service and health payments and health again is at the centre of the political context in this discussion, I think, from the left of centre SPD, as to whether we get to a formal conclusion of the coalition talks. But it seems that is going in the right direction. We watch that with interest. I don't have great insight into that, but hope that that's sensible. So it means Macron and Merkel, we believe, will be key players in this year's discussion on the EU 27 side. And we keep an eye on our friends in Ireland. The Taoiseach has been very vocal in making sure that the UK government continues with its commitments to an open border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. But it's interesting to see that on the practical side, there's freight service in terms of trucks being able to travel between Ireland and Spain, particularly important for pharmaceutical industry who have significant product which ships from manufacturing sites in Ireland to the EU market, and perhaps there's going to be further ferries between Ireland and France. So what are we doing in the context of all of this? We are focusing on trade policy across December, January, and making sure that those consultations into trade and customs bills, as Laura outlined, are ready to go as they pass through Parliament. We're continuing our UK government engagement. Next week is the BIA Gala dinner, and we will use that opportunity. We're fortunate enough to have Minister James O'Shaughnessy coming and speaking, so we'll engage with him there. As the government prepares for phase 2, our core messaging is that we need an implementation period to be agreed. We think the 10,000 days isn't long enough to do it, and if there's going to be a discussion about a future position, we need to make sure public health issues are top of the shop for a discussion. We'll continue to make sure that we share with you the thinking about movement of talent, and I hope that the letter from Brandon Lewis gives you some sense in easy language that Laura talked about of the UK government's thinking about the future direction for immigration for our sector. And I hope that where appropriate, the UK government is able to make more public announcements, perhaps some press statement or other creative ways of communicating their plan for life sciences to a global community. We'll keep going with newscasts, these webinars, weekly documents, our weekly newscast newsletter, and we're getting together some people who are particularly interested in this area for a Brexit Leading Network event next month. So if I can just summarise before we go to some questions, this month we've seen the important statement from the MHRA out. Probably doesn't give us all the answers we want, but it gives some clarity about the MHRA's thinking. We're seeing political manoeuvring on the implementation period and transition, and some of the work being done behind the scenes. So, you know, the UK France summit and other things there. I think that we'll see by the end of January, or I think the plan is to see what the shape of phase 2 negotiations might look like coming out. We're not there yet. I hope we've demonstrated that as a result of the hard work that we've done in the past, some of the issues that we're putting on the table at the heart is certainly the UK government's thinking, and I hope that they are in the minds of the EU27 as they approach the negotiation as well. And we'll be able to provide more detail, I think, on the shape of the negotiations and where we're going to be in February once we've got to the end of January. Is there anybody who's got any questions at this stage? Do type them in using the thing, and I will endeavour to answer them. So I've got some detailed ones here. Let me just have a look through. So Sarah, you ask about the MHRA position. I think you interpret it fairly, and when and by whom will negotiations start, and who will we be negotiating with? I think that is really the process of how the phase 2 negotiations are being managed, is the process that's being discussed at the moment, and I hope that we will see some sense as to whether there is a implementation period and how that might be done in the next month. I don't think we're seeing we've got a clear view on that at the moment. I wish we did. I'm afraid we don't, and I can reflect your comments back to colleagues we work with in the regulators. Peter, you comment about the statement on rights for continuing EU citizens. I hope you found it useful. We were glad to be able to get something. Is there an understanding in government that access to skilled personnel, wherever they come from, will still be required? I think people have got that message, and I think from our perspective, it's not just about. We always position this in terms of great science and global clusters benefit from brain circulation, whether that be within the EU, whether that be with the US, whether that be with Asia, and we always position that as the important thing for keeping both the science community and the business community that is close to science, our types of businesses, vibrant, healthy, and entrepreneurial. So, and I think there is some understanding of that. I think you're into the standard question about what was Brexit about? Was it about a concern around globalisation? And we could have that discussion in the pub for many hours. I fear not much more to add there, I'm afraid. MHRA wants to play a full role in the EU regulatory negotiations during Brexit, asks Ian, including being rapporteur for centralised procedures. But will companies still want to use the MHRA given that procedures could run beyond the Brexit date? Will they want to avoid the uncertainty and go somewhere else? Well, good point, Ian. I suppose the MHRA are, in their statement, make clear that they are looking to do this as co-rapporteurs. I think the benefit that one gets of the MHRA, particularly in certain areas, is expertise. It will be interesting to see where companies go, and you make a very sensible point as to whether a way of doing this would be to go to other people. I think the flip side of this is whether if there is a step up in the capability needed, whether other agencies have successfully put on the capability they need of the expertise level that you've got. I suppose what the benefit with the MHRA is they've done it before, they're quite expert, they know what they're doing. The risk you're running is, will they be allowed to continue to do it? The flip side is, if there's another agency, they may have less experience, but have the opportunity to continue doing it. And perhaps the sweet spot is for there to be a co-rapporteurship between experience and potential continuity. I don't know. I think companies will take a view, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes forward. Have the Brexiteers given any positives to the pharmaceutical industry that would support regulatory divergence? Asks Colin. If they have, Colin, I don't think we've spotted them yet. The nearest I could get is the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, in a speech before Conservative conference, believed that he believed that the regulatory position was holding back the cell and gene therapy industry, and that away from European legislation it could move ahead faster. I didn't ask him, as I saw him briefly, if he had any more detail on that in October, and he wasn't able to furnish that to me. I would be interested if anybody else is aware of any detailed arguments around supporting regulatory divergence that they've seen. I think in GM crops it's slightly different, but certainly on pharmaceuticals, I'm not aware of any detailed discussion of this. How do you see implementation period and transition? Are they synonymous, or have they been advised they could be different? Good question, Brian. I think that for EU law purists, some people could say that we are in the transition period now because Article 50 has been triggered by the UK, and therefore it will finish on the day that the EU leaves the UK, which is 424 days away. Therefore, this is transition. Therefore, one would not negotiate a further transition period. However, if you continue that legal logic, what one might negotiate is to have a implementation period where there is a period during which an agreed future state or an agreed untangling is given time to be implemented. So that's why I use the words. I tend to use both words, implementation and transition, because the other way is some in the UK would use the phrase that we want to negotiate to get to a transition period, and that transition period would start on the day after Brexit or at some agreed point, and then we'd have a transition. So that's why I use it differently, and I hope that gives you why I dance around on that spot. Has the MHRA issued any assurances that existing clinical trials running at March 2019 will not be affected by Brexit, i.e. in terms of QP relief, tariffs, etc.? I give you the words that the MHRA statement is on their website. I don't think it goes into the detail that you ask for there in explicit terms, but I think you're well aware that these are exactly the types of issues that we are discussing in detail, both with the EU 27, the importance of multi-year processes, multi-country processes, and the disruptive impact of them not being able to continue in the way that they have been started. So I don't think I can give you explicit assurance, but I can assure you that we are engaged and are putting exactly these points to them. Sebastian asks, I've heard that the EMA workload will be split between member states by the end of Q3, what could or is done to accelerate the deal to avoid having the MHRA put aside? I think I've heard similar. I think that what you're seeing now is a more forward position from the MHRA of saying, hang on a minute, that's not the case. We don't intend to back away quietly. We want to have a continuing role in this process, whatever that may be, and therefore we intend to take part. If you look at their statement, it's explicit about the wanting to be part of and put candidates forward for committees and such like on the basis of merit. So perhaps what you're seeing in the statement from the MHRA is a slightly more public position, which may reflect some other discussions which are going on behind the scenes. I agree that what we're now seeing is slightly different views between the EMA and the MHRA about expectations for this in the future. I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to resolve that in exact detail, but again, well spotted. Would there be any intention from the MHRA to accept EU QC test results? Asked Febe. Have a look at the statement, Febe. I think it, in simple terms, I think the answer is probably, and I think there is some satisfaction to that point on the statement from the MHRA. I think, remember, all of this is still predicated on, I think, what from the BIA's perspective, the MHRA's perspective, the EMA's perspective, the UK government's perspective, and the EU 27's perspective is a worst case scenario, which is a no deal hard Brexit in 424 days. So, and I would always, countenance against that and think, will a deal be done? But yeah, I think there is some satisfaction on that point there. I think I've got to all of what a good set of questions today. Thank you all on the detail. Do please continue to engage with us. If you are inspired by this or feel you need an evening off, there are very few single tickets left for our gala dinner next Thursday, which is a fantastic event of over 700 people from the UK life science scene. And we've also got, if you can't make it to the evening, we've got an event in the afternoon where we'll be launching a look back on the finances of the UK sector in the afternoon. All of these available on our website. One other thing I'd just drag out from our events list, which I'd encourage you to share with your medical officer if you're not the medical officer, is we're doing a new event with Chief Medical Officers Summit. If you've got those who are managing medical affairs functions with limited resources, I know it well from my time at Genzyme. We're trying to make sure that we're getting that community together and have a great event coming up at the beginning of March. So perhaps you could share this with others in Med Affairs if you're in Reg Affairs. Regulatory Affairs team obviously do a great conference, as you know, and we're trying to provide a similar one for Med Affairs. These are the dates of our future upcoming events. Our next webinar on the 23rd of Feb. If you're in Cambridge or you fancy the Women in Biotech networking event, do consider it. And our annual lecture is going to be an evening with Sir David Cooksey on May the 3rd. If you're not a member, but you've enjoyed this and you can see what we're doing, would like to be part of the organisation, do please contact Jane Wall on this email address. I've told you we're back for this on Friday, 23rd of February. And other than that, I'd just like to thank you for your attention and see you next month. Thank you.